Okay, 5 tips that I recommend before starting amigurumi. So tip number 1, I highly recommend using a cotton yarn to begin if you've never done it before. Cotton yarn creates really nice clear stitches, as you can see here, and it's probably the go-to fibre for amigurumi. And then when you get really good at using cotton, then that's the time you can move on to using more like plushy chenille yarns that could be a little bit more difficult to work with. Tip number 2, the most important thing when crocheting amigurumi is to create tight stitches. So I highly recommend that when you get your cotton yarn to use a hook size that's slightly smaller than the one recommended. So if it's recommending like a 3.5mm crochet hook, then just drop down to a 3mm, and that will keep your stitches just that little bit tighter. Tip number 3 would definitely be practice your invisible decreases, and the reason for that is when you do a normal single crochet decrease, they can sometimes look quite bumpy. So when you do an invisible decrease, I will put a link below to that particular tutorial which I've shown. You do an invisible decrease, it creates a much smoother finish on your amigurumi and you can't see where you decrease. Okay, tip number 4 is to do with sewing, and I always recommend to pin your arms and legs into place before you start sewing them on, and this just helps keep them in position. And one of the little things that I like to do when I'm sewing on the arms in particular is, if you can see here, is I tend to sew them quite flat. So I pinch the top flat and then I do a nice little quick whip stitch, and I also sew them in place down here, and it's just much easier to sew compared to sewing around like on the feet. So that's one little tip I have. Another little tip is when I crochet my amigurumi, now this may depend on your design that you're following, but I like to crochet the head and the body as one single piece. And around the neck area, I recommend doing one round of just a length, one single crochet in each stitch around. It just gives you a little bit of length. And then when I sew on the arms, I sew them on just one round below that neckline. And that just creates a nice dropped shoulders, so you can have things like scarves and things like that. And lastly, tip number 5 is to do with stuffing. And one of the most common beginner problems when crocheting amigurumi and stuffing your amigurumi is you can understuff and they can look quite floppy, or you can overstuff and then you've got the stuffing showing out through your stitches. So I highly recommend stuffing firmly bit by bit, so just pull that polyester filling apart and do it bit by bit, and shaping as you go. And with the arms and the legs, I tend to just stuff the end of the arm and then leave that understuffed there, and that just helps with stuffing. And a little bonus tip for helping keep those stitches tight is, now the majority of amigurumi is crocheted using the single crochet stitch. It's obviously US terminology, or the double crochet in UK terms. And a little trick to getting tighter stitches is to work what I call the X stitch versus the V stitch. There's like 2 types of single crochet, and the X stitch is when you crochet under and the V stitch is when you crochet over. And I'll put a little link to a little separate tutorial on that. So instead of yarning, I need to remember, yarning over to create probably the most familiar way of doing a single crochet, you crochet under. And when you crochet under instead, when you yarn under, it does create a tighter stitch. But if you'd like to know more about the difference between the X and the V way of doing a single crochet, then check out my tutorial below on that. But I hope you found those tips useful. They are very Happy Berry specific tips, and do subscribe for more little helpful crochet tips and Yarn Scrap Friday and loads of other crochet stuff. And I will see you soon for some more crochet crafting fun. Thanks for watching, guys. Bye.